The theater was quiet in a gentle way, not empty, but waiting. Soft lights rested on the red curtains, and the air felt thick with anticipation, like the moment before rain touches dry ground. People shifted slowly in their seats. A few whispered, but most simply breathed and waited. On the judge's table, Simon Cowell sat with his hands folded, his face calm, almost bored, the way it often looked before something unexpected arrived. He had seen thousands of singers. He had heard every kind of voice. Very little surprised him anymore. Backstage, two young men stood side by side, so alike they seemed like reflections. They were twins, dressed simply in dark jackets and clean white shirts. Their hair was styled neatly, and their faces carried the same nervous smile. If one breathed in, the other seemed to breathe out. They had practiced this moment for years, yet their hands still trembled slightly. One of them rolled his shoulders back, slowly, trying to release the tension. The other closed his eyes for a brief second, whispering a quiet reminder to stay calm. They had grown up in a small American town where music floated through open windows in the summer and old radios played late into the night. Their father loved Elvis Presley. On weekends, he would clean the garage with Elvis playing loudly, singing along with a smile that made the hard week disappear. As children, the twins had listened from the stairs, copying the sounds without even trying. It started as play, then curiosity, then something deeper. They did not decide to sound like Elvis. It simply happened, slowly, naturally, like learning to walk. As they grew older, the resemblance became impossible to ignore. Friends stopped laughing and started staring. Teachers paused in the middle of lessons when the twins sang at school events. People asked the same question again and again. How do you both sound exactly like Elvis? The twins never had a good answer. They just shrugged and smiled. For them, it was normal. For everyone else, it was something unreal. Still, being twins brought its own quiet problem. People rarely saw them as individuals. They were always, the twins, never two separate voices, two separate hearts. When they sang together, some said it was impressive. When they sang alone, others said it felt incomplete. Over time, doubt settled gently but firmly in their minds. Would anyone ever listen to who they truly were, or would they always be compared to a legend and to each other? The stage manager gave a small nod. It was time. They walked out together, footsteps steady, shoulders aligned. The audience noticed immediately. A soft wave of murmurs passed through the room as people took in how identical they looked. Simon Cowell leaned forward slightly. He had seen twins before, but something about their calm presence caught his attention. They introduced themselves simply. No big speeches. No dramatic pauses. Just honesty. When they explained that they would sing Elvis Presley, a few eyebrows lifted. Simon raised his chin, curious but cautious. Elvis was not an easy choice. It was risky. Legends cast long shadows. The music began quietly, a familiar melody floating into the room. One twin stepped forward first. He took a breath and sang a single line. The sound changed the air. It was not an imitation. It was not a trick. It was rich, warm, and hauntingly familiar. Gasps rippled through the audience. Simon's eyes narrowed, not in doubt, but in focus. The voice carried weight, like it had lived a long life already. Then the second twin joined in. The harmony was perfect. Too perfect. Two voices, identical in tone, shape, and feeling, wrapped around each other like they had always belonged together. It felt like Elvis Presley was standing in two places at once. Some people laughed softly in disbelief. Others felt their eyes sting with sudden emotion. The judges exchanged looks. One leaned back slowly, hands covering their mouth. Another shook their head, smiling in shock. Simon remained still, but his expression had changed. The boredom was gone. In its place was something rare. Wonder. As the song continued, the twins moved naturally, not copying Elvis's movements, but honoring the spirit. Their voices rose and fell together, then split gently, one leading, one following. It was beautiful, but beneath the beauty was something fragile. You could hear their shared history. You could hear the years of singing together, the comfort, the safety. But you could also hear the problem. They were so perfectly matched that it was hard to tell where one ended and the other began. Halfway through the song, something unexpected happened. The music softened. One twin stepped back, letting the other sing alone. The room shifted again. The single voice still sounded like Elvis, but now it carried a different weight. It sounded more personal, more exposed. Then they switched. The second twin sang alone, and the same thing happened. Two identical voices, yet each carried a slightly different emotion. One felt hopeful. The other felt aching. When they came back together for the final notes, the audience rose to its feet before the song even ended. Applause crashed through the theater like a wave. People cheered, shouted, and clapped until their hands hurt. The twins stood still, breathing heavily, eyes wide, trying to understand what had just happened. Simon Cowell waited for silence. When he spoke, his voice was calm, but careful, as if he did not want to break the moment. He said he had heard many Elvis voices in his life, but never like this. Never twice at the same time. He admitted that it shocked him. Truly shocked him. Then he paused. He told them something honest. He said the gift was incredible, but the real challenge would be learning how to stand as individuals, not just as twins, not just as echoes of Elvis Presley. The room grew quiet again, but it was a thoughtful silence, not a heavy one. The twins listened closely. They nodded. They had felt this truth for years but had never heard it spoken so clearly. Instead of fear, they felt relief. Someone finally understood. Another judge spoke about the emotion, about how the voices felt like memory and warmth and loss all at once. Someone else said the performance felt timeless. The praise was overwhelming, but it did not feel empty. It felt earned. When the decision was announced, the result almost felt secondary. Yes, they moved forward. Yes, the crowd celebrated. But the real moment came afterward, backstage, when the twins sat together in silence. One of them smiled and said softly that maybe it was time to sing different songs sometimes. The other nodded, eyes thoughtful, and said maybe it was time to write their own. They did not stop honoring Elvis Presley. They never would. He was part of their story, part of their family, part of who they became. But they began to understand that sounding like a legend did not mean living in his shadow forever. Weeks later, people would still talk about the performance. Videos would spread. Headlines would shout about twins who sounded exactly like Elvis. Simon Cowell would mention them in interviews, still shaking his head in disbelief. But for the twins, the most important change happened quietly. They began practicing alone as much as together. They learned to hear the small differences in their voices. They learned to trust that being separate did not mean being divided. When they sang together again, the harmony felt deeper, richer, because it was chosen, not automatic. On one calm evening, long after the bright lights and loud applause, they stood in their childhood garage. The radio played softly. An Elvis song drifted through the air. They smiled at each other, then sang, not perfectly in sync, but honestly. And for the first time, it felt exactly right.